Good morning, poetry lovers. It's Billy from Miso Hitomoji, and I am here at the park. It's about 5 a.m. Came to see the sunrise. Maybe you can see in the sky behind me. And I'm currently sitting on little rocks next to a stream as I get crushed by mosquitoes. But I wanted to get up early today. Sometimes, it's nice just to get out of the house a little bit early and to be able to be outside when there's not a ton of people around. But anyways, let's talk about today's poem. Of course, we'll do the poem and then the poet and then some thoughts. Today's poem is by Takuan Sōhō, and he was a monk near the end of the Ashikaga period, like during the Warring States period, and then at the beginning of the Edo period. And his poem today is Futsuhō to Seihō wa shito no karada to kokoro hitotsu kakete mo tarinai mono nari. That's pretty much what it is. I do these poems off the top of my head, where like I have the verse in my mind. I don't have like notes or anything with me, so sometimes I might make minor mistakes, but you can see it on the screen, and you can compare what I say to what the actual verse is. So to break it down, the first part is futsuho. Now that's written with the characters futsu or butsu, which means Buddhism or Buddha, and then ho, which is law. So in this case, it's talking about the Buddhist law, or really just Buddhist teachings in general. Then the next is seiho, which sei is the word for like world or worldly, kind of as opposed to Buddhist or like spiritual. So it's saying that like the Buddhist teachings or the Buddhist law and the secular teachings or the secular world. Then the next part is hito no, or people's, man's, kokoro to karada, body and mind. It's not kokoro and karada, it's mi to kokoro. Mi is also like body or oneself. And if you add mi and kokoro together, mi to kokoro, it can mean like body and soul. So the Buddhist law and the secular world have a person's body and soul. And then hitotsu kakete mo, so if even one of them is missing, hitotsu kakete mo means if one of them is missing. Then tarinu mono nari. Tarinai or tarinu in this case, it's like an older version of a negation, negative form of the verb. Tariru means like to suffice, so tarinai or tarinu would mean like to not suffice. And then mono nari, not really a definite meaning there. Like tarinai mono means something is missing, and then nari at the end means like it becomes. So put it all together, and it means in the spiritual realm and the secular realm, if a person's body or soul are missing, either one of them, then like something is lacking. It doesn't quite come to formation. So this is written by, again, Takuan Sōhō. He was a monk at the end of the Warring States period. I said Ashikaga period earlier, but the century of the Warring States, he was active at the end of that, and then the beginning of the Tokugawa Bakufu. And he's a pretty heavy hitter in the world of medieval Japanese Buddhism. He was a Rinzai Zen monk. He was one of the abbots of Daitokuji. Daitokuji is a temple in Kyoto that has kind of gone up and down historically in its fortunes. It was originally favored by I think Emperor Go-Daigo, and so it had pretty high status. And then when the Ashikaga shogunate came to power, they were opposed to the rule of the Emperor Go-Daigo, and so the temple was kind of looked on unfavorably by Ashikaga shogunate, and so it lost its status as one of like the 5 main temples of Kyoto. And during the Ashikaga rule, it wasn't in the best of conditions. Now it also produced Ikkyu Sojun. So Ikkyu and Takuan are kind of two of its bigger well-known names. And yeah, it's got a pretty influential history as far as the development of Rinzai Zen, especially. So Takuan, he had a pretty interesting life. He was born around Hyogo Prefecture, modern day Hyogo, and from a young age became a monk. And I believe I read that he was there to like recover the executed body of Ishida Mitsunari. We did one of his poems a few weeks ago. Ishida Mitsunari was the kind of leader of the main force that opposed Tokugawa Ieyasu in the Battle of Sekigahara. So he was, huge guy. If he had won, he would have been like who Tokugawa Ieyasu had become. He would have been the ruler of Japan. So his executed body was recovered by Takuan, and Takuan helped perform a funeral service for him. So even from a young age, he had a lot going on. At the age of 30, I believe, he became abbot of Daitokuji. So, it's a pretty prestigious appointment for someone at a, relatively young age. And from before Takuan's time, the idea that we have of like the Zen monastery and the Buddhist temple being this like spiritual and holy place that is secluded from the world and allows people in isolation to perform rigorous austerities and religious exercises. It's kind of a myth. That's not really how it happened. From the inception, Buddhism was originally like a state-sanctioned activity, and it wasn't, accessible to the common person. Like the history of Buddhism in Japan has always been tied up with the history of the government in Japan. And, of course, there was movements that responded against that, and then reformers who came and, tried to wrestle control of the Buddhist law, the Futsuho, as Takuan says in today's poem, tried to take that away from, being so tightly wrapped up with the government. Takuan, though, he's writing today's poem in response to this situation. Now, he was involved in something called the Purple Robe Incident, and the Purple Robe Incident, historically, emperors, prior to Takuan's day and in Takuan's day, emperors would be able to appoint like abbots of temples, or they would like make a list or make an appointment of giving purple robes, which signify like purple is like a royal color, signifying a high rank, the highest rank. Emperors could they could designate who they wanted to wear purple robes. And you had to be at certain temples, and you had to be obviously like the highest or one of the highest people at the temples. So at the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, the Tokugawa, the Bakufu, I believe it was Tokugawa Hidetada. He was the second shogunate in the after Ieyasu. He was the first after Ieyasu, the second overall Tokugawa shogunate. Sorry, it's 5 a.m., so my mind is not at its sharpest. But, Tokugawa government was really interested in social control. They did not want the country to fall back into the chaos that it had been in the previous century. And so they were, every aspect of life, Tokugawa government was, interceding and making rules for people to follow. And this appointment of purple robes from the governor or the emperor to the Buddhist establishment, the Tokugawa government wanted to step in. Their goal was to kind of loosen the ties between the Buddhist establishment and the imperial court and the imperial establishment, because that's one avenue of social control. People frequented temples, and temples were a very important part of people's lives. And if the temple establishment and the imperial court got too close together, that could be a possible, just switch hands here, that could be a possible rival to the Tokugawa government, which they did not want. So the emperor had already made the designation of these purple robes, and Tokugawa Hidetada said, like, no, you can't do this. These these appointments are now null. I'm voiding them. Like, they can't wear the purple robes. And, monks protested. Takuan was one of them. They were tried for sedition, and a lot of, I don't know the exact number, but a number of monks, including Takuan, then were actually exiled. Takuan was exiled to Dewa province, which is now like Akita and maybe north, like Aomori even. And if you know the geography of Japan, that's far away from Kyoto. And I mean, it's the furthest you could get away on mainland Japan from Kyoto. And back then, things were not as settled down and as, how can I say, well developed in that area. So you're like really getting, it's like being sent to the gulag in Siberia. I mean, that was pretty bad. So Takuan gets sent away there. It was interesting, earlier in his life too, he had protested against government regulations. There's something called hatto that the Tokugawa government made. And there's different kinds of hatto. In this case, though, the hatto were rules that were supervising Buddhist temples. And, they get down into minutia. And I in reading, I'm doing research for the future video on Banke, I might have mentioned a few days ago. And I read that, there's a document where Takuan is responding to these hatto, these government regulations, and the regulations were saying, like, no monk, back up a little bit, individual temples would receive different hatto, or like different lines. So it wasn't always like one set of regulations governing everybody. Like certain branches or certain lineages would receive, separate sets of rules that they were supposed to follow. And the one that Takuan was opposing, the rule that was proposed was that you couldn't become like a master. You couldn't get that status, like receive an inka or certification of your enlightenment. You couldn't be like a jushoku or osho until jushoku and osho are just titles. It means like master or head of a temple. You couldn't receive these statuses until you had completed 30 years of training and you had, passed or completed 1,700 koan. Koan are like the Zen questions that you might hear. We did one by Hakuin. I just combined Takuan and Hakuin. We did one by Hakuin a few days or maybe like a week ago about the sound of one hand clapping. Like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That's a famous koan that Hakuin created. So you're supposed to complete 1,700 of these koan and 30 years of practice, and then you can be an osho. So Takuan rightly protested to the government, saying, like, that's a completely arbitrary number and of koan and years, and one's enlightenment does not depend on completing any koan. In fact, it's a tool that's used to try to help get you there, but it's not the it's a means, it's not an ends, I guess would be the way that he was saying it. And like 30 years, again, is just like an arbitrary number because everybody's advancement comes at different speed. So, Takuan had this history of kind of bumping heads with the government. Eventually, though, Tokugawa Hidetada, he dies, and then Tokugawa Iemitsu becomes the third Tokugawa shogunate. He pardons Takuan. Takuan gets to come back, and he actually builds Takuan a temple in Edo, in the capital city, because he respects Takuan and wants to have his council nearby. And I think the story is, at the end of Takuan's life, he wrote out in calligraphy the character for Dream, and then he died. So that's... I mean, I did a lot more of the build-up to Takuan's adulthood than I did the end of his life, but those are the main strokes of Takuan's life. Now, for the poem itself, it's very suitable that I think he wrote this poem in response to this purple robe incident and kind of his life in general. Takuan, I'm not so familiar deeply with him, but it seems that he was trying to make things a bit better as far as, reasserting or I don't know if it's even reasserting, but like establishing Zen as a real spiritual teaching and not just like a tool of the government. At his time, I'm learning a lot in this research for the video about Bankei, but in Takuan's time, Zen had been in a very degenerate state. It was kind of the situation where people could kind of pay to get certified as being like masters, and the idea of like practicing koan was not that you get a riddle from your master and then you spend years of hard contemplation and you have like a eureka moment. It was more like there was sets of questions and there were sets of established answers. Your master would give you a question, and then you would have to do like a set number of interviews with your master, and during the interviews you would go through like a ritualistic question answer where you had to memorize the answers that are supposed to be given to like a chronological set of questions. So it had become ritualized. It wasn't the spontaneous kind of organic discovery of the state of mind that koans were supposed to be producing and Zen was supposed to be producing. It was very formal, very ritualized, something that people paid for, and it was something that the majority of people just went along with, but there were reformers like Takuan who were opposed to that. And so Takuan was trying to make the situation of Zen better, and I think he didn't really want to be so caught up in secular affairs, but he found himself in a position where he couldn't avoid them, especially as being an abbot of kind of one of the major temples of Kyoto. There's no way that you're going to be able to completely get yourself out of meddling from either the emperor or the shogun. That was just the state of affairs back then. So it's interesting that he talks about in spiritual pursuits or in worldly pursuits like the secular life, that if you're not completely dedicating yourself with your body or mind or like body and soul, then things are going to be incomplete and you're not going to fully make the progress that you need to make. I find it interesting that he uses body as one of the components of that. So that could denote a lot of things. It could mean like hard work. It can mean dedication. Like when you think of body, think of like the physical realm, not the intellectual realm. So it can mean like time. It can mean dedication. It doesn't just necessarily mean like actual elbow grease or physical power. Without time, without dedication, then you're not going to make spiritual progress. And in the spiritual world, just think about all the things that you have to use your body for. Back then, coming out of hundreds of years, not hundreds, but like 800 years of war, just rebuilding things. Like you're going to need a lot of manpower. You're going to need a lot of feet on the ground trying to improve the country and rebuild the infrastructure. And then also he uses kokoro. Now kokoro can be translated as heart, but it can be mind as well. So if you're not putting your whole mind into it, if you're not putting your heart into it, like your spiritual core, then there's going to be something lacking also. And it's interesting to think about that when you consider it in the secular realm. So in the secular realm, what does it mean to put your heart or put your soul into things? Does it mean like putting your intellect? Does it mean like putting compassion? That's one of the beautiful things about these poems is it's succinct. There's an economy of words that allows you to wonder and allows you to have different interpretations, but also to interpret differently in different circumstances. Now, like I explained in this circumstance, Takuan's talking about this purple robe incident. So he might be, it was kind of, his poem was kind of like a dig at the government, because I think he's saying, in the spiritual realm and in the worldly realm, like the worldly realm would be, what the Tokugawa government has control over. You have to, not only just making like regulations that punish one physically, or regulations that govern people's actions, But you also have to use your mind. You have to use like your discerning judgment when you're making these rules. Like I think he was saying that the Bakufu's decisions were kind of stupid. So yeah, it's interesting that you can apply Takuan's poem to different circumstances, because he leaves enough room there for you to adapt it and adjust it to the circumstances that are facing you at the moment. I really appreciate that part of his poem. Anyways, on another day where it was not sunrise and I had gotten more sleep, I might have had a bit more of an intelligible stream of thought than I had today, but hopefully I added something to the poem that helps you, see it in a different light, or helps you apply it to whatever you're dealing with in your life today. I have been Billy from Miso Shitomoji. Thank you very much for spending the time with me this morning, or probably this evening when you're watching it. But, thank you for the subscriptions on YouTube. And hopefully I'll be back tomorrow, not at sunrise, to record another video for you. Take care. Bye-bye.